Well, good morning and afternoon to those who have joined us for today's webinar. My name is Melinda Gertz. I'm the Vice President of Operations for DAC Patient Recruitment Services, and I appreciate you taking the time to join my colleague, Dan Donald, and myself for the webinar this afternoon to talk about site performance compounding, finding the right formula for planning to prevent poor patient enrollment at investigative sites. So with that, I would like to introduce our presenter today. Dan McDonald is the Director of Business Development for DAC Patient Recruitment Services. And Dan works from DAC's Boston office, and he is responsible for identifying income opportunities, building strategic partnerships, and managing contract negotiations. He rejoined our team at the end of last year of 2013, and he has previously served in the area of strategic and business development under DAC's former brand name, D. Anderson and Company. And Dan is also has authored a number of different has been an author for a number of industry publications and is a speaker across the globe as it relates specifically to patient recruitment and retention. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dan to kick off the webinar. Thank you. Dan?
Thanks so much, Melinda. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today. I am certainly honored to have the opportunity to share some information with you, which I hope you'll find relevant, interesting, and certainly actionable. And it's really one of the things we try to do with our webinars is convey and share some information that you can actually take back to your day-to-day jobs and apply and add value. So I hope that is the case today as well. In preparing this presentation, I was really thinking about the similarities between what we do as clinical operations specialists and patient recruitment specialists, and how that compares to what compounding pharmacists do as part of their job. And sort of what triggered this in my mind is that we see as compounding pharmacists for my son and some of his the stomach and gastrointestinal issues, and I started to notice, I guess, some of the similarities. As you may know, compounding pharmacists have really specialized expertise in creating highly customized medications for unique situations, and this is often the case when the mass-produced approach just doesn't work. It's a highly specialized approach to treating a problem that requires a proper understanding of things like the background situation. It requires relevant experience and with developing customized solutions. And it certainly requires flexibility and the ability to adapt the formula for success if needed. As clinical trial protocols become increasingly complex and specialized, we as an industry are also discovering that a cookie-cutter approach to finding and supporting investigative sites with patient recruitment just won't do anymore. So we are often forced, I would say, out of our comfort zone into exploring pathways that require much more creativity and a new approach. Not only do our studies require a unique approach to patient recruitment, but yet another requirement for customization really comes in the form of what we need to do for investigative sites and what their needs are. So if we go to the next slide, far too often seeds for slow or failed enrollment of clinical trials are often sown at the very earliest stages of the study planning process. The decisions made early on before the sites are even initiated can often have a wide-ranging impact on a sponsor's ability to complete enrollment of study subjects on time. So in our world of compounding, again, the equation for successful study consists of a mix of supportive and engaged sponsor with really a solid protocol, committed and passionate sites, and certainly dedicated study volunteers. It requires the right ratio to yield the desired results that we're looking for. So during this presentation, we're going to explore how that right level of patient recruitment planning can really enhance site performance and deliver better enrollment outcomes. So we're going to look at things like when to plan. We'll look at what you want to include in your plan, We'll certainly look at how to engage investigative sites and make them a partner in the process, in the planning process. And then what proactive planning looks like versus more of a reactive approach. And we have a case study that we can share with you that I think you'll find very compelling.
And Dan, I'd like to take just a minute here and share a poll question with the audience. So I'm going to go ahead and open the poll, and it'll pop up there probably on the right-hand side of your screen and will allow you time to respond. The question that we have for the audience today is, what percentage of your new study programs have a proactive patient recruitment plan, meaning one that involves more than counting on the sites to locate and enroll all the patients? So you have a couple of options there, and we have some time left as answers come in, and we'll go over that here in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Melinda. If we could go to the next slide. One of the things we want to share with you is just looking at the different stakeholders that are involved in a successful clinical trial. If you think about an approved IND or ultimately a successful NDA, we really have to satisfy many masters in order to have success. There are at least 5 main groups or stakeholders that are involved. We've got patients, we've got your study coordinators, your investigators, of course the sponsors, and last but certainly not least the FDA, not to mention CROs and other service providers that can enter the mix. So as we develop the study protocol and our clinical development plans, the different ingredients we add to our custom compound will have different effects on the various stakeholders. If you add eligibility criteria, you might dry up the funnel. If you back them out, you might flood the sites with patients. And you might also not satisfy FDA requirements. So it's really a tricky process. Thankfully today, a mix of both tried and true approaches combined with some of really the latest and most powerful technology-based data solutions are allowing us to plan better and increase the probability that we're going to have success with enrollment. Specifically things like using big data to identify which physicians and sites are seeing the right patients. We're also starting to see trends emerging that take the patient's perspective into account. And this is really an interesting development that we're seeing, but specifically we're being asked by sponsors increasingly to assist in the crowdsourcing of protocols. So conducting focus groups and large patient surveys to determine what patients think about a draft protocol. We're finally starting to look at the patient as a true partner in the clinical trials process, not just by stating that they are or by providing them with information, but actually seeking their insight. What do you think about this protocol? What do you think about the number of visits that are required or the procedures that are going to take place? How will this impact your decision to participate and your decision to stay involved in this study? So the way that we're going about sort of leveraging the insights of the various stakeholders is improving significantly.
Yeah, and Dan, just if I can jump in real quick because we've gotten the results back from the poll. So just wanted to let everybody know that of everyone that has responded, 26% of the respondents say that 25% or less are using a proactive recruitment program. 13% is 26 to 50%, and then it drops off pretty significantly there. So I think as Dan mentioned, as we go through the presentation here, we'll talk about the benefits, not only the cost, but also time benefits that one can achieve by really being more proactive in how you think about recruitment and planning for the what if. What if this were to happen? Do you already have the proper plan in place so that you can implement pretty efficiently and save a lot of time and cut out a lot of potential delays that it usually takes when you have to implement a rescue program?
Yeah, thanks, Melinda. That's terrific, and it actually is a good segue into the next section of the presentation where we talk about really our first major question, which is when should we start developing a plan for successful on-time enrollment? And the best answer certainly is at the inception of the program, when you first decide to move forward with a new clinical development program. I'd say the second best answer is as soon as possible. I'm not sure if there's a third best answer in this case, but certainly a proactive recruitment plan is critical for success. Far too often we find that sponsors are waiting till there's already a problem before acting, and I think as you saw in some of the polling results already, that the majority of sponsors and CROs that are participating in this webinar have admitted that often there isn't a proactive recruitment plan in place. I know that Melinda and I have been speaking at conferences for probably longer than we'd care to admit, but we've been talking about the importance of proactive recruitment planning. We have seen the industry make tremendous strides, but there's still a long way to go, and far too often we're finding situations where sponsors are having to kind of rescue enrollment on a program. So we're constantly working to educate and assist the industry about the importance of starting early. And we'll have some case studies as we move forward to help demonstrate the difference of the two approaches and the impact on cost and time.
So Dan, before we move to the next slide, just to follow up on that, I have another polling question that I would like to put out to the audience that you'll see again on your right-hand side of your screen to answer. And that is, when do you have investigators and or study coordinators review the study protocol? And the answer options are while the protocol is being written, during the feasibility process, at the investigators meeting, we only supply a synopsis to the investigator, or we don't have the investigators review it. So we'll go on to the next slide and give you a few minutes to respond to that question.
Okay, so here's sort of the doom and gloom aspect of the presentation, but what can go wrong certainly will go wrong based on our experience without prior planning. It's Murphy's Law. So proper planning of our studies is really such a critical factor to our success, but it's often one of the most rushed aspects of this of study management. When a decision is made internally at a company to move forward with a study, often you've got investors' attention, you've got the board's attention, and everybody wants it done tomorrow. So we rush into these situations, and often there isn't a plan put in place. And here are just some of the challenges we've seen and hear about most from sponsors when we're speaking to them and talking about their programs. You call them landmines, pitfalls, or risks, but the goal really remains the same. We want to try to avoid them if at all possible. So this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but instead is really focused on, I'd say, those issues which most commonly impact the timelines of the study and our ability to successfully enroll the study on time and on budget. And we'll talk about these different risks and some of the things you can do to mitigate them as we move forward, but things like patient pools drying up after the study starts, lack of a customized patient recruitment plan, and we'll spend a lot of time on that, lack of risk mitigation strategies, unmotivated or angry investigators, and delays and delays and delays, which is our biggest nightmare. So if you go ahead and leave it to chance, a lot of these things can happen. If we put together a proactive plan, we might be able to avoid some of them. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and Dan, real quick, we've got the poll results in, and it looks like that the majority of the folks say that they have the investigators and study coordinators review the protocol during the feasibility process. So thankfully, a small percentage that only provide a synopsis or don't have the investigators review it, but definitely the majority of the folks do it during the feasibility process. There are a few individuals, 9%, that do it more proactively while the protocol is being written.
Yeah, that's really terrific, and it's good to see there are a few people that are doing that. Would love to see more. I mean, I don't think there's any issue that we hear about more from investigators than protocol design. And certainly successful planning starts with protocol design. Protocol design determines the accessibility of the target population, but oftentimes we just don't find that sponsors are thinking about recruitment or retention challenges during that design phase and that development phase, but they should. Considering patient enrollment and attrition obstacles could certainly limit the need for protocol amendments or the addition of more sites down the line, and that's going to save you money. We also stress to consider the team structure of protocol review. Most often it's predominantly scientists who write the protocol. But what about the individuals who will actually spend time executing the study and executing on this protocol, the PIs, the clinical research coordinators, the other study staff? I'm sure that a lot of us have been to an investigator meeting. I know that I have, when you're just several weeks out from your first site initiation visit, and you've got investigators in the room that are sort of tearing apart the protocol in front of the sponsor and finding all sorts of issues with it, and it leads to an amendment, sometimes resubmitting to the regulatory authorities in different countries, and it can create a lot of havoc. So we definitely recommend bringing in a number of different parties to review your protocol as part of the proactive recruitment planning process. Certainly your complete internal review, like you're already doing, but also a review by outside therapeutic area consultants. These might be thought leaders that are in the space, therapeutic area thought leaders. Full investigator review and feedback, and don't forget the CRCs. So we would encourage you to develop a small panel. These could be investigators you intend to have involved in the study, or could just be other trusted investigators that have worked on other studies for you, but to get their unfiltered feedback about your program. And sometimes, obviously, you're going to have to compensate them to be part of that kind of a discussion and part of a panel, but we've determined over time through our experience that it's really invaluable. Involving a recruitment specialist, if you have your own recruitment department internally, bring them into the mix. If you need to work with a recruitment vendor, then we certainly can add a lot of expertise and insight. Looking at local country representatives, certainly if you're doing a global study, often there are insights that somebody in country that knows the healthcare landscape, that knows treatment and referral patterns, things like that should really be taken into account and can be invaluable in the planning process. And then last but not least, leveraging big data whenever possible, and we'll talk more about that as we move forward. So we've all seen many cases where the available patient population for a study has been overestimated, and we run into recruitment challenges. The feasibility responses all come back looking great, but once we've selected our sites and we've initiated the study, the patients start to dry up quickly, and it's just a problem that happens time and again. Too often I've seen studies that are inappropriate for a certain site or a certain country placed there because of shoddy feasibility work. And you probably heard through Tufts, CenterWatch, and other industry data sources, but 2/3 of sites only conduct one study. So those sites may be failing the industry, but I would argue that we're also failing them in that we're not giving them realistic protocols, or we're selecting sites that aren't just appropriate for our study, and we're putting them in a position to fail. So, you know, our big thing that we stress during the feasibility process is having a recruitment mindset throughout the design and execution of our programs, including the feasibility process. Arguably, a site's ability to enroll the right patient is going to have perhaps the most impact on the success of the study overall. And we hear this in forums like this, we hear this at industry conferences. You know, we've talked about site selection ad nauseum over the last 20 years. But we tend to ask the same questions time and again, and we're a part of feasibilities that come to us from CROs and sponsors. We see a lot of the questions that are put out there, and a lot of times it's really the same old approach. And we really need to ask ourselves if these are indeed the questions that we should be asking. While I'm sure the information that we're asking is needed and relevant, there definitely are other questions that would provide greater insight into how a site operates and whether they'll be successful in your trial. And we personally believe that attitude plays a big part in this, the attitude of the site. One of the things you'll see very quickly is the responsiveness. How quickly are you hearing back from the site regarding the feasibility? Is it obvious that they went through and reviewed the protocol that you sent them and they've come back with questions? Almost any situation where you're sharing a protocol, whether it be a vendor or whether it be sites, they really should have questions. It's very natural, especially at the early stages of a study. So that's one of the ways that you can tell that they're engaged. You want to look at their openness to training. Certainly, sites don't know everything, and there's valuable training that you can provide to them to help them be more successful in a study. You want to make sure that they're open to that. their willingness to implement recruitment procedures. If you're going to be arming them with recruitment support, whether internally or through an outside vendor, are they going to actually adapt and use those different tools and resources you're providing them? These are all things that we try to find out early on, and that attitude, almost as much as the number of patients coming through that site, really impacts the success of your program, because ultimately those patient pools do dry up at some point for many sites, and that's where the extra sort of elbow grease work comes in, and they have to go to a new level, and they have to really push hard to try to find prospective patients, and that comes down to attitude. So just a little bit more about our recruitment mindset for the feasibility process, and we won't go through every single one of these, but things like, including lesser known and competent and enthusiastic PIs. I mean, some of the best investigators we've had involved in studies that we've managed site selection for are those that are newer investigators or novice investigators, and they're often the most enthusiastic, while certainly still competent, and their ability to execute the study properly is fine. That attitude and that enthusiasm to be part of something that's leading edge science really drives enrollment for them and for their study team. We like to consider on global trials not just those investigators that are in the big sort of tier 1 cities, but also those that are in smaller cities that maybe work at lesser known sites but still are very competent. Definitely things like capturing metrics on their performance in past studies is also critical. This is something that we hardly ever see asked, and it's something we definitely try to push for, because if they've done similar studies in the past, you really want to understand how they've performed on those programs. And I think you'd expect the same from any vendor that you bring into your study. You certainly should expect that from the study sites. And then last but not least, consider the accessibility of that study site. So are they available at times that are convenient to the patient? Do they have night hours? Are they available on the weekends? How is the accessibility of that site in terms of public transportation? All of these things seem minor, but play a really big part in the decision to participate for a potential study volunteer, and also their compliance when they've consented and now they're part of your study. So the ways in which we can go about planning and our studies from a protocol standpoint, from a feasibility standpoint, have certainly grown in sophistication over the last 7 to 8 years. And thankfully, a mix of tried and true approaches combined with some of the latest technology are allowing us to sort of plan better and increase the probability that we're going to have success with enrollment. We've all heard for a long time about the advantages we would see in healthcare and research and the digitizing of health records. And it's probably just now or in the last few years that big data is really finally starting to sort of deliver on some of its promises. Specifically, we're now learning that we can mine rich databases to better understand disease prevalence and treatment patterns in certain geographic locations. You see an example here that leveraged insurance claims information in the United States to understand where patients were located geographically. This is for a cardiopulmonary bypass procedure that was related to an acute kidney injury program that we worked on. But this is just one example of the types of data that are available. There's also very rich investigator databases that are available even internationally. One of the things that's helped increase the amount of information available is the big effort that we saw over the last 5 or 6 years to increase transparency into clinical trials. The formation of national registries of clinical trials has given us a lot better insight into which investigators are out there that have experience, what types of studies have they worked on. Leveraging the web and doing other types of sophisticated searches, we can understand not only their level of experience, we can understand how often they've been published, we can understand their education, we can understand the sites or hospitals that they're affiliated with. And by layering all these different data sets, we really can better understand the site's ability or the probability that a site will have success enrolling for our studies, far beyond just a simple questionnaire that we've sent out for the better part of the last 20 or 30 years as part of our feasibility process. So also, sort of one last piece here, and and a part of good planning is really conducting your feasibility at the right time. Conducting a feasibility analysis in January and then initiating a trial in October is not fair, nor is it smart. The situation at sites is very fluid. Certainly, patient flow evolves and can be seasonal and changes over time, as does an investigator's level of interest and enthusiasm about a study. So we want to try to minimize the lag time between the site feasibility, the investigator meeting, and study initiation whenever possible. And if for some reason that timeline becomes 3 months or more, we definitely would recommend reevaluating the competitive market, looking at what other kind of competing trials are out there, but also conducting a second small-scale feasibility with the previously selected site. So our ability to start quickly and enroll quickly is ultimately going to have an impact on the success of our programs. And this is just some data we wanted to share with you that sort of expresses that visually. But the longer that your enrollment goes, sort of the later that you start enrollment, even after your feasibility process, the less your chance of being successful in the program.
Yeah. So Dan, I just was going to add something to the slide. You know, the information here is actually based off of just a culmination of data. It's not specific to any particular indication, but just across the board, when we look at overall site performance, this is really the trigger point, a measurement point is from the site initiation visit. So when you look at when a site initiation, so you've gone through your feasibility process and some of the key things that Dan has shared with you in terms of things to keep in mind when you're doing that planning and your feasibility. Within 30 days of that site initiation visit, if there is enrollment activity across the board, there's a 90% plus chance of overall success in enrolling the trial. And as you can see, the longer that enrollment activity is pushed out from when the site initiation visit takes place, the quick reduction in your overall program success. So, you know, if we remember back, one of the key sort of key pearls of wisdoms that Dan shared with us was, you know, if there is a significant, let's say even a 3-month delay from when you do your first feasibility process to when you're actually going to initiate the sites and then have the investigator meeting, if there happens to be a 3 to 4 month delay of when that occurs, absolutely, if you can, think about doing that truncated feasibility process or just check in with the sites again, because it's amazing how much can change within just a 90-day period, and then ultimately the impact and the effect that it has on your ability to be successful.
Okay, so we talked about when to plan and some of the steps and the items for consideration as part of an early and proactive planning process. So now the big question becomes, what do we plan? And the answer really is a plan. You need to have a plan for patient recruitment. It might not be a perfect plan, but you need to have a plan nonetheless. Your team should have a plan. Your CRO should have a plan. Your patient recruitment organization should have a plan. And yes, certainly your sites should have a plan, or you should help develop a plan for your sites. It's critical. Once you've got a good protocol and you have your feasibility process determined, there are other critical considerations as part of developing your patient recruitment plan. First, you certainly need to understand the recruitment landscape. You need to understand whether there's competing studies out there. You need to understand how studies enrolled in the past, what strategies were used. Those types of things can be gathered through publicly available resources, through interviews with investigators, and so on, but really understanding the recruitment landscape. You want to try to develop a recruitment plan for each site. And one of the services that we perform at DAC Patient Recruitment is a site needs assessment, where we go and survey and interview the site to really determine what types of support are needed and would actually be utilized. We find that sites appreciate being included as part of the planning process, and we have certainly seen higher adoption rates of tools and resources that we provide when they are part of that process. You want to think about things like getting ethics committee approval and IRB approval and what the timelines will look like for anything that's maybe patient-facing. Understand how patients are going to first learn about your clinical trial. In certain developing countries, patients are always going to be going almost through their primary care physician. Here in the United States and in Western Europe, the vast majority, some 65% and above, are actually going outside of their managed care organization or their primary care physician and self-referring into clinical trials. So you have to understand sort of where these different sources of patients will come from and what information, tools, and resources you're going to need to target them. Identify common stakeholders in the consent decision process. And this is really a critical piece. Often the decision to participate in a clinical trial here in the U.S. is made alone. Patients don't seek inputs from other caregivers or stakeholders, family, friends, loved ones, what have you. But in many other parts of the world, any healthcare decision is often a group decision. So if you're going to be speaking to the parents of the patient or a spouse or siblings or children, you really need to take that into account when you're going through the consent process. You have to have information available to them that's going to explain the study requirements. It's going to really explain what it means to participate, what their role is going to be in the participation of the patient in the study, and really make sure that they're as armed as possible. I've been a part of some market intelligence, market research studies that actually looked at the consent process in different parts of the world. And when we talk about places like Brazil or Eastern Europe or India, many times a number of people are actually involved in the consenting process. It makes the consenting process a bit more challenging, certainly. But what we did find is that when those patients actually make a decision to participate, they stay in the study. And so they take time and really do a proper due diligence. So there's sort of a cultural due diligence process built in at the very beginning. But once you pass that stage, you really got a dedicated patient. You want to try to engage CRAs as they provide a critical link with the investigative site. Sometimes you can't have personnel in different parts of the world. So if at all possible, you really want to try to engage local representatives that can help you better understand a particular part of the world. Next slide, please. So earlier we talked about the optimal mix of ingredients that, when compounded, sort of correctly equates to a successful study. We talked about supportive and engaged study sponsors and a solid protocol. We talked about committed and passionate sites and certainly dedicated study volunteers. And I'd like to add one more thing to the mix, which is having a contingency or a REMS, a risk evaluation and mitigation plan. Having a contingency plan developed is 2/3 certainly of the equation to successful study outcomes. Rarely does a study go as planned, and the same can be said for patient recruitment. You've got to be prepared to adapt if things go wrong. You may find that you don't ultimately use the contingency plan, but should you need it, you have it. And lastly, and perhaps just as important, proactively planning for it or developing a contingency plan will allow you to earmark budget dollars as needed. One of the things we've seen certainly is asking for that contingency money up front during the planning stages proves to be far better received by executive management and boards than on the backside when the timelines are getting squeezed and patients are getting short. So this shows really due diligence in proper upfront planning to senior management, and can allow you to actually get the funds in advance so that if something does go wrong, you're prepared, and if things go right, then you look good because you didn't use up the entire study budget. So success is when everything that goes wrong fits in your plan. This is a quote by Gary Roods, and I don't know who Gary Roods is, honestly, but I did my research online, and I guess he's the guy that just provides good quotes. So it applies, and we used it. But I thought that was very applicable to what we're talking about today. So if we go to the next slide, just to talk a little bit more about contingency planning, you definitely want to establish a line item for recruitment and retention in each study budget that you're working on. Recruitment costs can kind of vary wildly from anywhere to $1,500 per patient to $10,000 per patient, depending on factors. It could be the number of eligibility criteria, it could be the indication, it could be just a number of different things. The different parts of the world where the study is taking place can also drive up costs or drive down costs depending on where you're operating. With regards to retention, we would recommend that you allocate about 5% of your site per patient grants for retention. This is definitely an area that is just unfortunately not considered enough as part of the planning process. In fact, our research has found that 90% of sites have no formal plan or funds to address retention. So it's something you definitely need to consider as a sponsor and support them with as you develop your programs. We also wanted to share with you some of the common contingencies for slow enrollment. Things like hiring a new CRO. Obviously, there's huge cost of switching and delays that are going to impact the success of your study if you have to actually go in a different direction with your CRO. The addition of sites. The average cost to bring new sites on board on a program is anywhere between $20,000 and $30,000 per site in the U.S. So very significant costs. A protocol amendment and all the different people that are involved in that, the impact on regulatory approvals, the impact on timelines can have huge cost ramifications, up to $1 million on average on a typical protocol. That's not even considering things like operating costs. Daily out-of-pocket operating costs for each day of delay can be $100,000 to $150,000 or more. And certainly the opportunity costs. If you look at each day that drug could have been potentially on the market generating sales, those costs can be just absolutely astounding. So the importance of contingency planning can't be overstated.
Yeah, and Dan, I wanted just to go ahead and put out another polling question for the audience, and it is really about how much on average does it cost to add a site. I mean, I know you shared with us here that, you know, in our experience, we're seeing $20,000 to $30,000 in the U.S. to add sites, but I know that this can vary and people probably have different experience. So if you'll take a few minutes and just respond to what it is you're seeing the average cost is, that would be great. Okay, we'll give it just a few minutes here. We have some responses coming in. So far, it looks to fall in lines with what we're seeing. The majority of the folks have reported between $15,000 to $20,000.
Okay, terrific. It looks like that'll stay open for a few more minutes if anybody hasn't responded yet.
Yep.
So we have two more sections to go through, and I know this is a lot of information. So how do you go about engaging sites in your plan? The big answer this time is really to listen. And this is something we're going to talk about a little bit. It's such an important and critical part of the planning process. If you go to the next slide, time and again in our interviews and surveys and discussions with sites, they express to us that one of their biggest frustrations is just not being included in the planning, not being asked for their inputs. And earlier we talked about conducting a site needs assessment as just one impactful way to not only give the site's input and a sense of partnership and inclusion, but also as an effective way to sort of learn about best recruitment practices that are deployed or employed by high enrolling sites and some of the challenges that they're expecting with this particular study. Outside of getting their inputs, one of the areas that we've seen to have a very positive impact is through proactive and ongoing or supplemental training programs. A training program that's conducted at the investigators meeting or through a webinar really arms the sites with knowledge which can be immediately put to good use on your study program. Programs might include a review of patient recruitment fundamentals, You can talk about enrollment challenges and a discussion of potential solutions. You could do roundtable discussions where sites can share best practices. You could review some of the recruitment support tools and materials that are going to be provided. And certainly if there's a recruitment provider on your program, you know, we can talk about the types of tools and the types of support that are going to be provided and how sites can really leverage that expertise and those resources to be successful. Here at DAC, we're actually an accredited continuing education services provider, so applicable attendees actually get continuing education credits when they attend the trainings that we conduct. So typically that really, sites see this as a way that sponsors kind of give back to them, and it gives them additional motivation and sort of enthusiasm to participate in these training programs. And then last but not least on this slide, something that we often employ that works quite well is the development of a CRC advisory panel or advisory committee, where CRCs can gather virtually, maybe through a WebEx type gathering like this, a web conference, and on a regular basis to sort of discuss some of the challenges they're facing, some of the best practices, what's working well for them, what's not, provide recruitment and retention focused feedback to the sponsor, and much more. So this is a terrific way to give really the sites a voice, not just the beginning in the planning process, but on an ongoing basis throughout your study, and really leveraging information directly coming from the front lines and being able to apply that and make adjustments kind of on the fly with the program. So what about the investigators? And what role do they play in the success of your study? There are certainly elements of the planning process that require us to focus on investigators, and we're just going to talk for a minute about those. We've touched on things like giving investigators and CRCs input during the protocol planning process, but there are other elements that should go into your plan as well. And a lot of it comes down to the contract of the CTA with the site. We've encountered situations over the years where the biggest problem related to patient recruitment wasn't that the site didn't have patients, or that they didn't have support, or that they didn't have a talented staff, but that the investigator grant was completely insufficient or unfair. So we really need to make sure that as much as possible we're giving investigators fair grants and competitive grants. One of the things we often recommend is the need for, or the consideration of, local representation. If you're contracting with sites in other parts of the world, in certain countries a local representative will have unique insights into the culture around pricing, contracting, negotiating, and they'll be able to negotiate a more fair and competitive budget with the sites than perhaps you'd be able to do on your own. And it also, on the opposite side, kind of can help to prevent some strong-arming by investigators in certain parts of the world. As much as possible, we want the CTAs to be milestone-driven based on performance. We want to ensure that the grant allocation is fair. Obviously, in many cases, all of that grant's not just going to the investigator, it's going to the hospital, the administration. So we really want to understand how that budget breaks out, how much of it is filtering through to the investigator, and whether it's enough to keep them engaged and motivated. And certainly be sensitive to regional differences in compensation. This is 2014. Investigators talk with each other. They see each other at national conferences or international conferences. And you just don't want the word to get out that somebody's getting paid dramatically less than somebody else and have it really come back to bite you. So these are some of the different things to consider. There's a number of other things on the list here, and we certainly would recommend you take time to read through them. One of the things that I just want to touch on is mid-study rejuvenation meetings. Again, it's all about keeping investigators engaged throughout the study, not just at the investigators meeting, but perhaps scheduling a conference call with them once a quarter where the sponsor gets on the phone and talks about how things are going, or you even hold face-to-face meetings or web-based meetings, but really trying to keep those sites engaged. And last but not least, having backup sites ready at the very beginning. So some sites will be willing to sign a contingency type of contract where they're only going to participate if other sites are asked to leave the program. Some regulatory authorities in different countries will also require you to submit your site list up front. So having your backup sites identified in advance can really pay dividends in a lot of different ways. So at this point, if you're not still convinced about the importance of developing a proactive plan and engaging sites in that process, then perhaps these next few slides will finally hammer home that point. And I think the evidence is pretty compelling. If we go on to the next slide, we just wanted to show you some different sort of scenarios and look at the budgetary impact of a rescue program versus a proactive program, and how different decisions you make can impact the success of the study and certainly impact the budgets on a program. So this is for a multiple sclerosis program, and we're going to use it as our example with 100 sites and 1,000 patients, projected enrollment rate of 0.8 patients per site per month, and an enrollment over 12 months. And the total projected cost of the program was $10 million. After 6 months, the enrollment was lagging on this particular program, and the decision was made to amend the protocol and to replace 30 of the sites. And this is really sort of study management 101. This is something that we see just happen time and again. It's sort of the fallback plan that most sponsors and CROs have on a study. If one site's not performing, we'll cut them out, we'll add another site. Well, there are very real costs associated with doing that midstream. As we talked about earlier, the average cost for an amended protocol is about $1 million, and the average site replacement costs are anywhere between $20,000 to $30,000 and above. And the answers to the polling questions that Melinda just posted really helped prove that. So in this particular scenario, the impact on the overall program cost was an additional $1.9 million, or a 19% budget increase. So a tremendous increase to the overall price of the program, and certainly one that would get senior management's attention or the board's attention at your company. So the next example is looking at another potential solution or another potential approach to the same scenario. So again, enrollment is lagging, but instead of adding a bunch of sites and perhaps revising the protocol, the decision is made to add a centralized recruitment campaign. So in this particular scenario, you're looking at some startup time, right? You've got to put this plan in place, you've got to roll it out across the study sites, and you've got to get everybody sort of on board. That's going to take 2 to 3 months. There's going to be some costs associated with that delay as that process takes shape and your enrollment continues to lag. Our average cost for that would be about $250,000. And the recruitment campaign for this size of a study and the scenario described might average out around $1 million. So the total amended project cost in this particular scenario is $11.3 million, so a $1.3 million increase and about a 13% budget increase overall. So a step in the right direction, but still a fairly significant allocation of budget dollars to have to make or have to ask for midway through the study, and certainly not something that's going to be looked at positively internally by your company. So what is the alternative? Well, we've been talking about it now for the better part of 45 minutes, which is a proactive plan. And this is looking at a proactive costing scenario. So all the things we talked about, from the development of the protocol, getting the input of investigative sites and other key stakeholders, even patients in today's day and age, to really conducting the feasibility process with a recruitment mindset, to implementing training programs, and all the other things that we've talked about that can really have a significant impact. So putting a recruitment plan in place ahead of time is going to certainly cost you less. And the average cost for this particular type of program for a proactive recruitment program would be about half that of a rescue program. So it's much more expensive to develop something when the study is already underway. In this case, the average is about $500,000. So your total amended project cost now is $10.5 million, which is only a 5% budget increase. And so we've taken a very significant step in the right direction when we put a proactive plan in place versus not having a plan at all. So just to summarize, for the first scenario, we added about 19% budget increase, and that was adding sites, and that was adding amending the protocol. In the second scenario, we left those things the same, but we brought in a recruitment provider, perhaps. We created a centralized recruitment campaign that had a 13% budget increase. And in the third scenario, the one, of course, that we're recommending, you have a proactive plan in place. Yes, it's going to cost you more overall than maybe it would have if you hadn't, or at least in that initial presentation of the budget to the senior executives at your company or to the board, but it's going to save you a heck of a lot of time and money in the long run and make you look good in the process. So cost savings with a proactive planning program could be anywhere to 160 to 280%. And I think that really hammers home the point that a proactive plan is certainly should be a crucial part of the development of your program. So in summary, and thank you all so much for your patience, we've gone through a lot of information today, but consider expanding your protocol review team, apply a recruitment mindset to the feasibility process, consider sites as a critical partner in the success of your study and treat them like it. Even think about now the role that patients play and maybe getting their inputs. And this is something, as I mentioned, we're seeing an increasing number of sponsors doing. If nothing else, develop a proactive recruitment or retention plan and establish those line items in your budget ahead of time for recruitment and retention. And at the end of the day, make sure that you follow through with your plan. If you put a plan in place, it's there for a reason. If you have to execute on it, then follow through, and hopefully at the end of the day, you're enjoying study success. So thanks so much for your time, your patience. I hope you've learned something today. I hope you found the information we shared with you useful and actionable. And I believe we're going to be opening up the floor for questions now.
We are. Thank you so much, Dan. That was really great. And, I have to say, in my years of experiences as well, we definitely are seeing more of a trend moving towards the proactive planning, and even some sponsors, going to the intended patient that would participate in a clinical trial proactively through various settings, through surveys and focus groups, to really get insight as to how they, how the study design looks and the type of challenges they're faced with. So definitely see a trend moving in that direction, and we are opening it up for questions. So again, I will remind you that if you have any particular questions, please just use your chat feature and send the question to me, and we'll get that answered. And while we wait for some of the other questions to come in through the presentation, Dan, I did have one question here that I'd like to have you answer, and that is, it says, I have a study that's already enrolling and struggling. What are some fast ways to help jumpstart enrollment?
Yeah, that's a really terrific question, and so there are certain strategies that you can implement that are things that can be deployed much quicker than, for example, anything that might be patient-facing. So anything that's going to be patient-facing, there's going to be some costs and time, obviously, involved in developing those materials or that information or what have you, but also anything that's patient-facing is going to have to go in front of an IRB or ethics committees internationally, and that can create very significant delays. We're not saying that shouldn't be part of your plan if you've got a study that has a significant timeline for enrollment still left, or you expect to increase the enrollment timeline. But there are other things that you can do that we talked a little bit about during today's program, things like implementation of a training program. A training program is a great way to sort of kickstart the study. It gets sites engaged again. You can start you can talk about the protocol. You can talk about challenges they're facing. You can share insights from some of the sites that are performing the best. Sometimes we'll bring a clinical research coordinator from one of the top enrolling sites into these programs and have them talk about some of the things that they're doing. But we've seen sometimes dramatic results as a result of implementing a recruitment training program, and it's something that you can do pretty effectively, quickly and cost effectively. The second thing that I would mention is anything that's physician-facing. So, for example, a physician referral program where you're going to go out and share information about the study with physicians in the local community around the study site. Again, these are materials and information that aren't patient-facing, that don't require IRB approval, and you can execute on pretty quickly to start getting some referrals into the study center. So those are just two examples, and we have a lot of other things that we do on programs to kind of kickstart enrollment, and would be happy to share those with you offline, but hopefully those are some good examples you can take back to whoever asked that question.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. Looks like I have another question in, and this is from an individual that's conducting a global study, and they would like to provide sites with recruitment support. How do I know which type of initiatives are approvable in a particular country?
Well, that's a great question, too. Well, in our experience, when we were supporting a global trial, there aren't a lot of, I guess, traditional well-known recruitment tactics which aren't allowed or approvable by the ethics committees. Instead, perhaps the most important thing is to focus on the level of acceptance and adoption of those strategies by the sites and investigators themselves. So I know that over our 20-plus years of experience, we've collected quite a bit of data on this, and we have a matrix that we sort of use internally which specifies the levels of adoption and the effectiveness we have seen in our experience supporting global studies. Essentially, what the sites will use and what actually works and what they won't use. And so we would welcome the opportunity to share our knowledge and insights with you if you want to follow up with us about a specific study in the proposed countries that you're looking to include on that program.
All right, thanks, Dan. Well, looking at the time, it looks like I don't have any other questions at the moment, but if you happen to send a question in, we will definitely follow up with answers. I want to thank you again for your time and attention this afternoon. It's been a pleasure. And,
there is another question, Melinda, that came through to me directly. I can share it with the group if that's
sure.
Fine.
Thanks.
Okay. There was a comment about the opportunity cost seeming high. One of the attendees talked about maybe a blockbuster drug revenue, but they find that the biggest recruitment challenge for phase 2 studies are that they're complex and don't yet have indicated clinical market value. And they were asking about a cost distribution by phase. They commented that they've never seen that, but they think that the difference by phase should be mentioned. And certainly that is true. I mean, I think what we're talking about is the overall, phase 1 through 3 development program for those drugs to get through the phase, 3 step of a development process. Certainly operating costs are high, and the opportunity cost can be significant. But to my knowledge, I haven't seen a breakdown by phase. Certainly there are a lot of companies that are looking at these things. I've worked for some of them, so I will go back through my contacts and my information sources to see if I can find that. And I do have the name of the person that asked that question, and I'll try to share that with them. And if I can share it with the group as well, I'll do that. But that's a very good question, and thanks so much for your input.
Great. Well, thank you again, Dan. We really appreciate your time and everyone else's time on the phone. Here you have Dan's contact information, so as he said, if you have any questions or would like any additional follow-up, please feel free to reach out to Dan directly. So again, on behalf of Dan and myself, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks again.